Welcome back. Our first guest today is Samra Zafar, a woman who not only achieved her goal of pursuing an education, but did this after overcoming a very abusive relationship. So I'd like to welcome Samra Zafar to the show. Welcome, Samra.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
So Samra, your story, it's a story that we hear that many South Asian women face, but they actually don't. They're not vocal about it. But your story, not only are you vocal about it, but you actually published it in Toronto Life, which became the best-selling story that they have ever published. And now you're really helping millions of women across the world. So for our viewers who aren't aware of Samra's story, I really want to start talking about that right off the show because it's a very, very important story. So can you take me back to July 22nd, 1999? And that is the day before your wedding. You're sitting at your husband-to-be's house in Pakistan, Karachi. So can you take us back there?
Yeah, it was a very scary moment. You know, I mean, I was 16 at the time. Actually, I had just turned 17. And you know, I was just sitting there with everybody around me, and everybody was really happy and, you know, telling me to stand next to him. Oh, they look so great in pictures, and, you know, and I think that was the main reason we got married. And and I remember feeling extremely scared and terrified and uncertain what's going to happen. I'm trying to be happy, and I should be happy in order to fit in with everybody around me, and you know, because I didn't want to be called ungrateful or you know, somebody who's going against the family's wishes and honors and stuff like that. So it was like, when I think back, I you know, I was a child, and facing our impending marriage the next day. So it was a very scary moment.
So you naturally were, you know, you're very studious, you love to learn, and you had all these, you know, ambitions and thoughts for yourself. And I mean, I'm Pakistani as well, so, and there's a lot of things that I can relate to with your story personally as well. But I know the culture, and I know that marriage is such a huge part of it. It's almost like, you know, and even in South Asian culture overall, I think, you know, all over the continent, like we pretty much have kids to marry them off and start planning their weddings. Especially for girls.
Especially for girls.
You're just expected to kind of get married, be that good housewife. And this was not something that you had, like you had the desire to learn and study. So how did you kind of deal with that? How did you kind of come to terms with that?
You know what, actually, when the marriage proposal came along, it was portrayed to me and my parents in a way that, you know, we will send her to university in Canada. Don't worry, we won't stop her education. So I was the eldest of 4 daughters, and I grew up in an environment where, you know, all the girls around me and my cousins were all talking about, oh, our marriage and this and that, right? And I'm gonna wear this color bangles, and my dress is gonna be like this pretty. And I was like, oh, I want to go to Harvard. I want to go to Stanford. So I was always like the misfit. And then when, you know, no girl from my extended family had ever really gone abroad to study. So when I was talking about these things, and you know, I was told, no, you know, my parents were told, oh, you should fix her. You know, she's too out there, and she's too ambitious. Who's going to marry her if she's like this? And then when this proposal came along, I guess, you know, my parents thought it was a win-win situation because, okay, she'll get to go to study in Canada, and we won't be worried that she's going alone. And, you know, because she's a girl, we can't send her alone. And this was kind of like a win-win in their minds. Like I'm absolutely sure they weren't doing anything vindictive or evil towards me. No one would do that to their child. But it's just a cultural conditioning that is so, you know, ingrained that marriage is the purpose of a woman's existence.
But it is definitely not. And the thing is, so your husband was 28 years old at that time, and you worked in the IT industry. So obviously, at that time, people thought, well, what a great fit, because he'll take care of you, he'll take you to Canada.
So he looks good with me.
And he also agreed. You told him that your one condition was that you wanted to continue your education.
Well, I didn't have the right to put conditions, but yes, that was my one thing, and my parents put that forth. And I did tell him, when the one time that I spoke to him before the wedding, for like 2 minutes, I did tell him, you know, my only question was, you'll let me go to school, right? And yes, that was what was promised.
That was what was promised, but I want to hear about the aftermath, which is when you actually came to Canada. From the story is that initially it was a good marriage, but things started to change shortly after his in-laws moved to Canada as well. So can you just take us through that journey and what happened?
Yeah, I mean, initially, you know, I thought that, so right away I got pregnant. So that was the one thing. And then I was told, okay, you can't go to high school now because it's inappropriate, it wouldn't look good. So I started going to the Adult Learning Center, and my husband would actually take me and drop me off and all of that to do my grade 13 courses. But as soon as his parents arrived, there's this, I don't know what there is. Like, you know, if the guy is treating his wife well for some reason, that doesn't go down very well with the family. Yeah. So you know, the behavior started to change, and there was a lot of neglect. I wouldn't even, you know, go out of the house for weeks, and I'd be the one up all night taking care of the baby, and if the baby's crying, that's my fault, and I was reprimanded. My parents were insulted all the time for not giving me enough dowry. I was told that you know, I should stay at home, and in fact, his mother once told me that, you know, if we had if you were becoming a doctor and we'd stopped that, then that may have been an injustice. But you haven't even done your A levels, so if you don't let you go to school, that's nothing wrong with it.
It's constantly.
And in fact, you should be grateful that you got to the real purpose of being a woman sooner, and didn't have to go through all that education crap.
Wow.
So you know, I was one of the lucky ones apparently, and you know, the marriage just became more and more emotionally and verbally abusive. And I completely lost my identity, my voice. You know, I couldn't speak up, and you know, I was I was a very confident girl. So I just completely lost everything. And by the time the first 5 years were through, I was like a shell. So the first time I actually went back to see my parents after 5 years of marriage, my parents couldn't even recognize me.
It's conditioning, right? They want to kill your spirit because it's easier to control you that way.
Absolutely.
And Samra, I want to hear more about...
And abuse is all about power.
I want to hear more about this, and also about the suicidal thoughts you had. So we're going to talk about that and more right after the break. Guys, don't go anywhere, because this story is just getting more and more interesting. So we'll see you right after this short break. Welcome back. We are sitting down with Samra Zafar and talking about her story. So Samra, we left off talking about how within the first 5 years of your marriage, you had completely changed from the strong, confident young woman you were to someone now who was completely unrecognizable. So I also want to take you back to another moment that happened, which was, I would say, maybe one of the most, like, it's a very dark space during your time. And I'm going to quote a passage from the article. So, and I quote, I was having suicidal thoughts all the time. I was convinced my life was over. One time I took a razor blade into the shower and thought about cutting myself, stopping only when I heard my baby cry. Yeah. When I read this sentence, and I could just envision you being there and then hearing your child crying, and then that shift happening internally. So can you tell us a little bit about what was happening during that moment for you?
You know, abuse is, when you go through abuse, it's kind of like living in a dark box with no light and enough air that you can just survive, but you can't breathe freely. It's like living in constant suffocation, fear, always walking on eggshells, and it's the darkest place ever. And people associate abuse only with like beating up and physical abuse, but at that time there was no physical abuse happening, or very minimal. There were just 1 or 2 isolated incidents, but it was the constant emotional letdown, like always saying, you're useless, you're worthless. You're treated this way because you deserve it. You don't deserve any better. And when you hear that on a day-to-day basis, you start believing that about yourself. And then you think, you know, my life is completely over. If this is what my life is going to look like forever, I don't want to live anymore. So I did. I mean, all the time I was fantasizing about either running away or dying. I would pray to God that, you know, to give me death instead of this life. But I also, you know, somewhere deep down knew that I need to live in order to make sure that my daughter does not go through this. And I think that was like the moment, that shift. You know, I heard her cry, and I was like, oh my gosh, you know, like, what's going to happen to her if I'm not around? She's going to get married at 16 or 17 or something, and this would happen to her too, and I need to protect her. And I think that's kind of what just snapped me out of it at that time.
And psychological abuse happens a lot in our culture, and this is kind of the way that they want to control the girl, or control the girls and women, and kind of. And
then by the time the physical abuse happens, you have completely lost your entire defense mechanism.
So tell me about the turning point where you finally just said, that's enough. and you had the courage to, because I know in our culture for a woman to leave a marriage or to stand up and say, you know, I've had enough.
Oh my gosh, all
that is something I know. Been there, done that, right? So when you do that, you're automatically just attacked. So tell me about that experience, the stigma that came with being brave enough.
That was, you know, after a very long marriage, and there were times when I had tried to leave before as well. You know, there was a time when I had left and my father passed away, and I think that was like the pivotal moment for me, because at that time I had hit rock bottom. Like I had lost my one support system. I was sent back to the same abusive marriage in the same house in Canada, because my father was no longer around to take care of me and my responsibilities. No education, no job, no hope, and you know, sometimes when you hit rock bottom, there's no way to go but up. The last dying words of my father to me were, "You don't need anyone. You have the strength within you. So take charge and get out of it yourself." And I think that kind of just stayed with me. And then when I did come back here, that's when I started babysitting and tutoring at home and finishing all my high school courses. I couldn't go out of the house and get a job or study, so I did everything at home. And I was allowed to do that as long as I was at home and supplementing the family income as well. So, but I would still save just a little bit every month. And it took me a few years to save up for my first year tuition. And then finally, I started university in 2008. And that was after 10 years of marriage and after having both my children. And it was, you know, even though like I had the money at that point and I had all the, you know, the roadblocks figured out, but there was a lot of, you know, sort of emotional backlash that came to me. But by that time, I think I had grown a little bit of a thick skin. And then I was in university and I started getting counseling there. And that's when I learned that what was happening to me was abuse. And it was not okay. It was not my fault. You know, it's not something that I could change or fix by fixing myself. Because up until that time, everybody had said to me, oh, you know, it's something that you're doing. Just try to keep him happier. Try to cook better. Try to be a better wife, a better mother, a better daughter-in-law. Try to, you know, find out what makes him angry and avoid that and stuff. So it's always, the blame's always on the woman, right? Because somehow, if this is happening to me, it's because there's something wrong with me. And even if, let's say, there's not, if the reason that I'm not okay with it, that's being abnormal, you know, like, so you should be, like, I was told by his parents that I should be very grateful that at least I'm not getting beaten up. Or, you know, they would give me examples of other women who would be getting beaten up all the time. Oh, at least look at her, like, she's such a great woman. She gets beaten up every day and she still stays for the family honor. So at least, you know, you're not in that kind of a dire situation. It's just, you know, once in a while or whatever. And you're living in a house and you're eating and you're, you know, so what more do you need? So, like, the idea of a woman fighting for her respect and her freedom of choice is something so alien.
Human rights, basic
exactly,
human rights.
Basic human right. Like, we don't even have those, right? So, so when I, you know, started university and I started learning of all this, then I started questioning things and challenging the behavior at home. And then the abuse just got worse. So emotional and verbal, it turned into more and more physical. And at that time, you know, I had enough awareness and about my rights as a woman and in Canada. And the most important thing was confidence. That, you know, yes, it's going to be difficult. It's not going to be easy. I will face a lot of, you know, difficulties, but maybe there's a minuscule chance that I can make it, and I'll take that chance.
And you did. You have made it. You went on to pursue further education. You ended up getting your master's in economics now, and now you're also, you know, speaking worldwide, speaking to other women about it, and you've also initiated Brave Beginnings. So can you tell us quickly a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, like, hard work paid off. The cultural backlash was humongous after I left. I was called, you know, a bad woman and with no character, and she must have been an unfaithful wife. That's why this happened. Or you know, you're leading your girls on a path to, like, shamelessness or whatever. But yeah, eventually hard work paid off. I worked 5 jobs, raised my children, went to school full time, and graduated as a top student in the entire university. And now I'm on their board of governors, the youngest person ever to be elected as an alumni governor. I'm publicly speaking worldwide on this cause. And the reason I did that was because I knew that my story was not just mine.
No.
It's the story of millions of other women and girls out there who continue to suffer in silence in the name of honor, in the name of shame and stigma, or because they feel they have no options or support. And that's what Brave Beginnings is all about, is to provide them with that hope and that support. That once you leave, it's not a big bad dark world out there that's gonna chew you and spit you on the roadside.
Yeah.
There are good people who will believe in you, who will hold your hand and teach you how to build a life. And we actually attach women who have escaped abuse or oppression. We attach them to mentors who work with them one-on-one to get their life back on track and rebuild a new life of respect and happiness.
Amazing. This is a cultural issue, and I'm so glad we have a predominantly South Asian audience who is watching this, and these are things that we have to kind of address, and it's so amazing that you used your story to help other people and found your purpose, because I think everything, I believe that happens for a reason.
Change happens only when you break silence.
Right.
So that's what it's all about.
Sarah, I mean, honestly, after hearing your story, I still have chills because you've overcome so much. And the fact that you're sharing this story with us and all of our viewers, I'd like to personally thank you, because I'm sure there is at least one viewer out there that has been touched, and hopefully this conversation will spark the change that needs to happen in their life.
I hope so.
Thank you so much for coming on
Thank you very
today.
much for having me.
Don't go anywhere, because we'll be back with more right after the short break. Most importantly, you can eat anything with an narcolepsy,
right?
Because you can ruin the food coma bloatingness.